In the early months of 1988, a man named Ron Coburn stood on the floor of the Savage Arms factory in Westfield, Massachusetts, and looked at the company he had just been named to lead through a bankruptcy reorganization. The factory employed 600 people. It made bolt-action rifles, lever-action rifles, shotguns, combination guns, and lawnmowers. A product line that had grown so broad during decades of corporate ownership changes that nobody on the management floor could give a clear accounting of which products were profitable and which were consuming resources that the company did not have. The bankruptcy filing had been necessary because the financial deterioration had been going on long enough that there was no other option remaining. Coburn looked at the production floor and made a decision that seemed, at the time, like the most drastic thing a man could do to a firearms company short of closing it entirely. He decided that Savage Arms would stop making everything except one rifle. One rifle, one product line, all resources concentrated on a single bolt-action model that had been in production since 1958. Everything else would be auctioned. The factory space not needed for the one rifle would be rented to a railroad distribution company to keep the cash flow alive. The workforce would be cut from 600 to 100. Every vendor the company owed money to would be paid in full, because the law allowed Savage to walk away from those obligations, and Coburn decided they would not. That decision, made on the floor of a bankrupt factory in Westfield in the early months of 1988, is the reason Savage Arms still exists today when Winchester's New Haven plant has been closed for 20 years, when Colt has been through Chapter 11 twice, when Marlin was sold out of a Remington bankruptcy for $30 million, and when Remington itself has been through bankruptcy twice in 30 years. The rifle Coburn staked the company on was the Model 110, a bolt-action designed by a Savage engineer named Nicholas Brewer in 1958 and named for its original retail price of $109.95. The Model 110 was not the most prestigious rifle in the American market. It was not the Winchester Model 70, which carried the rifleman's rifle designation and a premium price. It was not the Remington Model 700, which had been introduced in 1962 and dominated the law enforcement and military sniper rifle conversation for decades. The Model 110 was the rifle that a working hunter with a limited budget bought when he needed accuracy and reliability at a price that left money for the hunt itself. It had a threaded barrel system that made barrel changes and headspace adjustments simpler than any competing design. It had been in continuous production for 30 years when Coburn bet the company on it. What it did not have in 1988 was a trigger that the serious shooting community could defend without qualification. That problem would be addressed 15 years later. In 1988, all Coburn needed was a rifle that worked and that the company could build profitably with 100 workers. The Model 110 was that rifle. You need to understand what Arthur Savage built before you can understand what Coburn was rescuing. Arthur William Savage was born in England in 1857 and grew up in Jamaica, where his father was the British government's inspector of schools. He came to America and settled in Utica, New York, and spent his spare time in the 1880s and early 90s developing a hammerless lever-action rifle with a rotary magazine that displayed the number of rounds remaining through a small window in the receiver. The rotary magazine was the key innovation. Every lever-action rifle that preceded it used a tubular magazine that required flat-pointed or round-nosed bullets to prevent the tip of one cartridge from resting against the primer of the cartridge ahead of it under recoil. A tubular magazine in a rifle chambered for a Spitzer-pointed bullet was a detonation waiting to happen. Savage's rotary magazine held the cartridges in individual chambers, points forward but not resting against anything, allowing the use of pointed, high-velocity cartridges in a lever action for the first time. He patented the design in 1893 and founded Savage Arms in Utica in 1894. The Model 1895 that came from that founding was manufactured initially by Marlin Firearms in New Haven, because Savage did not yet have the production capacity to build it himself. It was the first lever action in America designed specifically for the new smokeless powder cartridges with pointed bullets, and it competed directly with the Winchester catalog on every shelf that sold sporting rifles. When Savage entered the 1911 pistol trials against Colt, Springfield Armory, and several other competitors, his pistol came in second. The government contract went to Colt. The number 2 selection was Savage, a distinction the company has cited in its promotional materials ever since. By the 1920s, Savage had acquired J. Stevens Arms in 1920, bringing in the Stevens single-shot line and the .22 long rifle cartridge that Stevens had introduced in 1887, and had become the largest firearms company in the world by some measures of output. In 1930, Savage acquired A.H. Fox, one of the premier double-barrel shotgun makers in America. The catalogue had grown to cover nearly every category of sporting firearm. The company that had started with one engineer's rotary magazine in a Utica workshop had become the largest sporting arms manufacturer on Earth. A working man who wanted a lever-action rifle in the 1920s or 30s was looking at a catalogue that listed the Savage Model 989 alongside the Winchester Model 984. Two lever actions that represented genuinely different design philosophies aimed at the same working hunter. The Winchester was simpler, cheaper, and chambered for the 30-30, a cartridge available in every hardware store in America. The Savage was more expensive, more mechanically sophisticated, and chambered for the 300 Savage, a cartridge Arthur Savage had introduced in 1920 that delivered performance approaching the 30-06 from a shorter case that fit his lever-action magazine. A man who bought the Model 989 was buying the more capable rifle on paper, a rifle that could be fed pointed Spitzer bullets that the Winchester's tubular magazine made dangerous. A man who bought the Winchester 984 was buying the cartridge that was already in the gun rack at the feed store. The Model 989 asked a hunter to understand why pointed bullets mattered and to care enough about that difference to pay more for the rifle that made them safe. Many did. The Model 989 ran continuously from 1899 to 1998. A run of nearly a century that required sustained quality and sustained customer trust to maintain. When a man handed a Model 99 to his son, it was because the rifle had earned the handoff through decades of reliable performance, and the son understood that even if he had never heard of a rotary magazine. Both men were right to trust it, and the American hunting market supported both companies through the middle decades of the 20th century without forcing either to choose between them. World War I tested the Savage production floor the way it tested every American firearms factory. Savage built Lewis aircraft machine guns for the war effort, the drum-fed air-cooled guns that equipped the observation planes and early fighters of the Allied air forces. The production capacity that Arthur Savage had built for sporting rifles turned out to be directly applicable to the large-scale manufacture of military firearms, as it had been for every major American gunmaker since Colt's wartime production in the Civil War. The Second World War deepened the involvement significantly. Savage built Thompson submachine guns for the United States Army, Lee-Enfield bolt-action rifles for the British, who needed volume production the British factories alone could not supply, and Browning aircraft machine guns for both Allied air forces. The engineering discipline required to build to military specification and the production culture that grew from meeting government contracts at sustained volume shaped the Westfield factory in ways that lasted long after the war contracts ended. A factory that built machine guns to military specification in 1 decade can build hunting rifles to hunting specification in the next, and the discipline transfers. The problem is that the discipline requires someone in the management structure who understands it, values it, and protects it from the normal pressures of cost reduction that every corporate owner imposes on every acquired manufacturing business. The corporate ownership era that began in the early 1960s was what unraveled the discipline the war years had built. Between the early 1960s and the late 1980s, a series of public and private corporations bought and sold Savage Arms the way financial holders buy and sell productive assets when they understand the balance sheet but not the business. The lawnmowers appeared during this period, a product added to diversify revenue in ways that had nothing to do with what the production floor knew how to make well. The product line expanded beyond any coherent manufacturing strategy, adding models and calibers and configurations without the production discipline that allowed the factory to build any of them to the standard the Savage name had earned. The quality control that had defined Savage's reputation since Arthur Savage patented his rotary magazine in 1893 began to erode as ownership priorities shifted away from the floor and toward the quarterly report. By the mid-1980s, the company was consuming more than it was generating. The bankruptcy filing in early 1988 was not a surprise to anyone who had been paying attention to the trajectory, because the trajectory had been visible for years to anyone who was watching the floor rather than the balance sheet. You already know which side of this you are on. You have always known. A firearms company is not a financial instrument. It is a set of human skills applied to the manufacture of precise mechanical objects, and the skills exist in the hands and the judgment of the people on the production floor and in the engineering office, not in the balance sheet. Every corporate owner who bought Savage between the early 1960s and 1988 understood the balance sheet. None of them understood what was in the hands of the people on the floor, and because they did not understand it, they could not protect it. What Ron Coburn did in 1988 was restore the connection between the company's financial decisions and the manufacturing reality those decisions affected. He cut the product line to what the remaining workforce could build with precision. He paid the vendors because the vendors would need to trust the company again, and trust cannot be rebuilt on a default. He replaced the piecework pay system, which rewarded volume without regard for quality, with an hourly wage system tied directly to the quality of each piece produced. He put the company's entire identity on one rifle and made the only question whether that rifle was the most accurate thing in its price range. By 1990, Savage was financially stable. By 1994, it was doing well enough that the ownership group decided to sell it to a competitor to fund a technology investment. And Coburn made a competitive offer and bought the company himself, a decision that the NRA's American Rifleman later noted was particularly pointed because the company that sold Savage to Coburn subsequently went bankrupt. Coburn bought the company they had tried to sell to a competitor and turned it into a manufacturing success. That same year, he acquired Lakefield Arms, a Canadian manufacturer of 22 rimfire rifles, and applied the same manufacturing discipline that had saved the Model 110 to the rimfire line, a process he described by saying they savagized it and put the same kind of heart and soul into it. The AccuTrigger arrived in 2003, a user-adjustable trigger system that could be set to a pull weight as light as 1.5 pounds while incorporating a safety mechanism in the trigger face that prevented discharge from jarring or dropping. Before the AccuTrigger, every production rifle trigger in America required either accepting a heavy and imprecise factory pull or paying a gunsmith to reduce it, accepting the liability risk that the modification created. After the AccuTrigger, every buyer of a Savage rifle could set the trigger to his own preference from the factory package, with no gunsmith required and no liability waived. Every major rifle manufacturer in America had introduced a version of the same concept within a decade. The company that had been bankrupt in 1988 with 600 employees was named Manufacturer of the Year by the Shooting Industry Academy of Excellence in 2003. The same year the AccuTrigger went to market. The rifle that Coburn had bet the company on in the spring of 1988 had become the oldest continuously manufactured bolt-action rifle in America after Winchester's New Haven plant closed in 2006. There is a Savage Model 110 in a gunroom in a farmhouse outside Bozeman, Montana right now. It was made in the mid-1990s, after Coburn had stabilized the company, but before the AccuTrigger existed. It is chambered in .280 Remington and has taken elk for 28 consecutive seasons. The man who owns it bought it because it was the most accurate rifle he could afford in the year he bought it, and he could not afford a Remington 700. He has since been offered more for it than he paid, several times, and has declined every offer because the rifle has never given him a reason to want a different one. He does not know Ron Coburn's name. He does not know that the company that made his rifle went through bankruptcy protection in the same decade the rifle was designed and survived by betting everything on the line that his rifle belongs to. He knows the rifle shoots where he puts the crosshairs, which is the only argument that was ever made on its behalf. The chain runs from that Bozeman gunroom back to a Westfield factory floor in early 1988, where Coburn sold off the equipment for $350,000 and rented the empty floor space to a railroad company and cut the workforce from 600 to 100. It runs from that decision back to Nicholas Brewer's 1958 design of a bolt-action at a price point of $109.95. It runs from Brewer's design back to Arthur Savage's rotary magazine, patented in 1893, the design that required Marlin Firearms to manufacture it initially because Savage did not yet have the floor space. It runs from that patent to the founding of Savage Arms in Utica in 1894 in a market dominated by Winchester, Remington, and Colt. The Utica factory is gone. The company that built the competition's rifles for Arthur Savage was destroyed by Cerberus Capital Management and sold from a Remington bankruptcy for $30 million. Winchester's New Haven plant closed in 2006. Colt has been through Chapter 11 twice. Remington has been through it twice. The company Arthur Savage founded in 1894 on a rotary magazine and a pointed bullet is still making rifles in Westfield, Massachusetts. Two men in a sporting goods store in any Midwestern or Western state. One of them behind the counter, and one of them asking what the most accurate bolt-action rifle is for under $1,000. The man behind the counter pulls out the Savage before the sentence is finished. The man asking handles it and reads the price and nods. No further explanation is required. Coburn made that conversation possible in 1988 by betting the company on a rifle that cost $109.95 when it was new. The bet paid. The names that went bankrupt are the names that did not make it. The official record says Savage Arms was founded in 1894 and is still operating today as the fourth largest gun manufacturer in the world. The accreditation says Manufacturer of the Year, 2003. The American Rifleman says the Model 110 is the oldest continuously manufactured bolt-action rifle in America. The actual work behind all of those facts, says Coburn, standing on that factory floor in early 1988, selling the auction equipment for $350,000, paying off the vendors when the law said he did not have to, and cutting 600 workers to 100 to bet on a rifle named for its original price. The industry record says Winchester closed in 2006, Colt went through Chapter 11 twice, Marlin was sold from a bankruptcy for $30 million, and Remington went through Chapter 11 twice in 30 years. The Westfield factory is still running today. All of theirs are not. The difference is one man on one factory floor making one decision in the early months of 1988.